Welcome to the Spreadsheet Skunkworks. So what is this series all about? Well, it's certainly something new for the channel. Most of the videos on the channel today have been about clear, smooth, step-by-step tuition, and this video series is not about that. So that's the first point to make. If you want clear tuition, then take a look at some of the other videos on the channel. This video series is called Spreadsheet Skunkworks, and that's because it's about trying to understand what is possible in Excel, what is possible using VBA. I've used the word Skunkworks because Skunkworks they used to describe a place in an organization where they do the cutting edge research, they have crazy development projects, and that's what this series is about. I've got my own crazy Excel project, which is, can I teach Excel? Can I create an Excel file using VBA that can play chess? That is my Skunkworks Excel challenge. So what do we mean by that? Well, I'm not talking about creating a spreadsheet interface for a chess computer. I've seen people do that online. I'm talking about something much more crude and rudimentary than that, which is, can we get Excel, well, first, can we build a board in Excel, create a visual representation of the board? Can we put the pieces on the board? And then can we get Excel to understand where the pieces move? Now, I'm kind of an intermediate chess player, you might say. I certainly understand the rules and how the pieces move. So can we get Excel to do that? Understand what the possible moves are, and then the next step is to assess what the best move might be. And gradually, step by step, can we build a really crude, rudimentary chess computer? And that's the challenge in the Skunkworks series. How far can we get with that? And eventually, if possible, we have to see how I get on. I'd like to go on chess.com, actually use the spreadsheet on chess.com and play somebody and see what level we can get to with this Skunkworks challenge. Can we actually beat somebody at chess using a spreadsheet-based chess computer, which is effectively what we're looking to develop. So it's not going to be clear, smooth tuition. It's about trying to understand what's possible in Excel. But I think this is a really important thing to do with Excel and in learning generally, to try to get away, if you can, get away from the day-to-day pressures of delivering a project, of having to get something done for your boss or a submission in an assignment, and try to assign some time to doing something creative, something that wouldn't be directly relevant to your work maybe, but in doing so you're creating a kind of safe space away from all that pressure for you to create and experiment. Just like a footballer has a training session, it doesn't matter if they make mistakes in training sessions, they try new stuff. You can see my drum kit behind me. I play the drums, and just like when musicians have a practice session, they might jam and just practice, test out new ideas, test the boundaries of what's possible. That's exactly what we're doing, a bit like spreadsheet jamming. We're trying to understand, what's possible, create some new ideas, implement some new ideas, and hopefully learn lots and lots in the process. But it's not just going to be all about programming. We are going to be using VBA, of course, to kind of get Excel to understand what's going on and to make some moves. But we're also going to be doing things like creating a board. In this video, we're going to create a simple representation of the board. So it shouldn't just be for high-level, confident Excel users. There should be something for everybody. So with that said, let's get into it. I've not set any particular structure for this video or indeed for the video series. I'm just going to try to produce one video a week, hopefully release it every Monday. Spreadsheet Skunkworks chess challenge, and let's see how far we can get. Let's see if we can make it onto chess.com and actually challenging someone to a game of chess. So let's get into it. Well, I've got the screenshot open here, and I've got Excel open here rather, and you'll be able to see it on your screenshot. Brand new Excel file, haven't done anything to it. So what are we going to do first? And this is always a big challenge in Excel development projects. How are we going to get started? So it's certainly worth in the beginning just to sit down and write down in English how we might work through the task. Well, I think a first idea would be to try to create a visual representation of the board in Excel. Excel consists of a grid, so naturally seems to lend itself to creating this kind of effect, but that's going to be the focus for this video. Can we just create the board? Now obviously we could go through kind of manually formatting the cells, putting the colors in, and that would be possible, but this being, you know, Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions, we're gonna try to understand how can we use programming to speed up that task, you know, because we could create a board manually, but if subsequently we thought, well, those colors aren't quite right, I'd like to change the colors, then it would take us a long time to do that manually. But using Visual Basic Programming, we can create a little routine to create the board automatically for us, select some colors, then create the board automatically. So just a simple task, but we've got a programming element in that. So into the spreadsheet once more. So the first step is going to be just to create a grid. And the chessboard, we've got an 8x8 grid, 64 squares. So I'm going to start in cell C3 here, holding down the shift key. I'm working on a PC, holding down the shift key, using the cursors to select an area here. And then I want to adjust the width of the cells. So I could do this manually, just clicking and holding here, adjust the width of the cells that way. But I'd like to do it using an Excel shortcut. It's good to get into using keyboard shortcuts. It's going to speed up how you're using Excel. And a good shortcut here is Alt-H-O-W, which gives me column width. And then I'm going to try 5. So I've just changed the column width there using the shortcut. So I've got 8 columns there with the that are uniform, the same size. So now I want 8 rows. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing, this time using the row height shortcut. So Alt-H-O-R, Alt-H-O-H rather, Alt-H-O-H gives us the row height shortcut. And I think we want, let's try 25 here. There we go. That seems to be pretty good. I'm trying to create squares, so the same height and the same width, and this seems to be about right. So I can now create the coordinates here. The way chess is kind of recorded is using the coordinates of each of the squares. So let's just go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. There we go. You notice I'm using the cursors to move between the cells. That's another nice way to speed things up. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. I'm just going to adjust these column widths as well. These don't need to be as wide as they are, so take them down to 3. So now we've got this simple kind of board effect, 8x8 grid. But we're missing formatting. It doesn't look like a board at the moment. We need some black squares and some white squares. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, clearly we could just change the colors manually. The top left square is going to be, in fact, A1 would be here. Okay, I'm just thinking about the orientation of the board here. Okay, I'm going to switch the orientation actually, as if we're viewing it from, as if we're playing with the white pieces. So let's just do this, and then I'm going to switch the numbers around now. This is going to allow me anyway to understand better what I'm doing. What I'm doing. So here we're viewing the board from the white perspective. Let's just write white down here to remind us. There we go. So now we've got the board set up. We're looking to put some colors in. So A1 I can see is a black square. So I'm just going to do the usual, go through the usual process for formatting that square, and that's fine. And we could do this fairly quickly manually. What would be a good shortcut now? Maybe you know a good shortcut we could use to color multiple squares. Well, to do that we could use the repeat last action shortcut, which is the F4 key. F4 key if you're on a PC, and we could just work through the squares like this. So I'm just hitting the F4 key. And this seems to do the job. Yeah, and it wouldn't be too frustrating to work through the whole thing just using the F4 key. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and complete this. So this is a really good illustration of how useful keyboard shortcuts can be. So 30 seconds or so managed to format the whole board. So that's certainly an option, and that F4 shortcut so useful for working with spreadsheets when you're doing little manual jobs like that. But we want to go a bit further in this video, and we want to think, how could we do that at the click of a button? We want to get to a situation where, as I said at the beginning, what if we wanted to change the colors of the squares? We've got a black color here, but it's a very kind of bold black color. And what if we wanted to give that a little bit of subtlety or nuance, make it look a little bit more visually appealing? We wouldn't want to have to go through, even using the F4 key would get onerous after a while. So how can we use VBA code to automate this task so that we can do it just at the click of a button? Well, to do that, I'm just going to clear these cells. Alt-H-E-A. Alt-H-E-A allows us to clear the cells. So let's suppose, there's different ways to do this, of course, but a good start is usually just to record some code. So what I'm going to do is go to C1 on the chessboard, which is cell E10 according to Excel, but according to our chessboard coordinates, cell C1. I'm going to color that black and record, use the macro recorder, record the process of doing that. This is usually a good way to get into coding tasks. If you're not sure how to get started, this can be one of the most difficult things in programming. How do I get started with the task? If you don't know what to do, then just do something manually, but record it using the macro recorder. That's going to give you some code. That's going to give you a starting point. So where's the macro recorder? Developer tab. And then if you haven't got the developer tab, you can go to your Excel settings and make sure it's visible. Just Google Excel developer tab. You can find out how to do that. Then we've got record macro up here. Just going to hit the record macro button, asking us for a name to give the macro. Always a good idea to give an informative name so that we can understand from the name of the macro what the macro does. Let's just say color square. Going to select a couple of squares because I'd like to see the code for selecting the squares. And then I'm going to just color it black. And that's all I need to do, but I'm going to go to the adjacent square, so D1, and then color this square white. That's going to give me a little bit more code to work with. Now that's all I want to do, so we've got to remember now to stop the recording. Now we can go into the Visual Basic Editor. We'll have a module in there. This is how Excel organizes the code, or how we can organize the code in the Visual Basic Editor into modules. So it's a good idea to group routines that do a similar thing into a module. We'll get onto that later. Double click on the module, and this is in VBA the things that I've just done. So this is a great way to get into coding, do something in the spreadsheet, and then see in the Visual Basic Editor, you can see what you've done described in Visual Basic Code. So you can see I selected E10, and then this code here is going to be to do with coloring the cell, and then selected another cell, and then we've got some more code here to do with the coloring. So that's an example of how kind of accessible code can be, and Visual Basic is a fairly kind of forgiving coding language. I mean, just by reading the code, we can get an idea what's going on. Range E10.select, you know, even if you didn't know anything about VBA programming at all, you could guess that means selecting cell E10. And then even with the code to color the cell, we can understand just by reading through it in English. We've got words like color in there. So that seems to be something to do with coloring the cell. So just by reading through the code, we can often get an idea about what's going on. So I'm interested in the code to color a cell black. So I know that's this code here. color cell black, and then you'll remember I colored a cell black and then colored another cell white. So this cell here, we could say color cell white. So here I'm just introducing some annotations using the inverted comma on the keyboard, and then whatever I write appears in green. And these are a great way to understand code. There's nothing worse often than just seeing a whole load of code in Visual Basic without much structure, or annotations can take a really long time to understand that. So there's various ways for us to help make the code clear. Structure, indentation are a couple of ways. Also annotation. So you'll see through the course of this series, I'm going to use lots of annotations. So we've got the building blocks here. We've got code to select a cell, and we've got code to color a cell black. So let's go back to the spreadsheet. So what are we looking to do here? I'm just going to clear these cells again, Alt-H-E-A, to clear a cell. Well, I'd like to start by coloring this cell. So this is C10, start in cell C10, and then go along and then skip a cell. So I'm not going to the next cell, to the adjacent cell, I'm going to the cell after, and then to color that cell. And yeah, thinking about the whole board, that seems quite complicated. So let's simplify it, simplify the task. And let's just work with this first row. Row 1 on the chessboard, we want to have alternate squares colored black. So that seems to be fairly straightforward. So how might we do that? Well, let's start by selecting the cell, which I think is cell C10. There we go. Cell C10, that's going to be the starting point. That's the bottom left corner, the bottom left cell on the board. And that we can see from the chessboard that that should be black. So just by doing this, I would select C10 and make it black. That's what this code would currently do. I'm just going to comment out this code because I want Excel to ignore the remaining code for the time being. There we go. So again, I've just recorded some code. Now I'm manipulating it, simplifying it. This is a good way to work through a programming task. So I'm selecting cell C10 and then coloring the cell black. So let's just try playing this code. I'm going to put a button in the spreadsheet now, and then attach the code to the button, holding down the Alt key here, so I can size the button with precision. And then which macro do I want to allocate to this button? Well, the color square macro is the macro we've just created. So I'm going to hit OK then. There, now I've got the button, edit the text here. Let's call it color board. Color board because we are literally coloring in the board. That seems to make sense. Now remember, back in the Visual Basic editor, we can see color square is the name of the macro, and that's the macro that I've assigned to this button. So that seems to make sense. So what we can do now is we can click this button. That's going to run the macro we just created, and something's going to happen. Now at this point, I'm just going to save the file, F12 key, on the desktop. Let's call it Excel Chess for the time being. There we go. Need to include the Visual Basic too, so save as Excel macro enabled workbook. That's just out of your screenshot, Excel macro enabled workbook, and save. And there we go. Okay, so before running the code, I saved the file. Very important to back up the file because you can't undo a routine. Once the routine's run, you're kind of stuck with it. So good idea to save the file there. So I'm just going to hit color board now, and I can see that the color comes in. Just clicking on the board there, just clicking the button, and that seems to work pretty well. I'm also going to step into the code at this point just to demonstrate what's going on. Okay, let's clear that cell one more time. So I'm going to step into the code now. Let's just start here. Using the F8 key, stepping into code, working through it step by step. Really important programming technique in Excel. Allows us to understand what's going on, allows us to debug, refine code, getting it doing the right thing. On a PC, if you click into the routine, use the F8 key. The F8 key, you can see it's going to progress through the code one line at a time. We can then watch Excel at the same time to understand what each line of the code does. Really useful. So we haven't executed this first line yet, range C10.select. Once I hit the F8 key, you can see that line of code has been executed. We've selected cell C10. So powerful. We can see the code and see the spreadsheet at the same time. Really great way to build understanding. Going to keep working through the code. And then we can see that the cell has been formatted. We've got our black color in there. And then we go to the end of the routine. All of this code is commented out. These are annotations, so Excel ignores them. It's going to go straight to the end of the routine. There we go. So this is a good starting point. But we want this action to be repeated multiple times. Remember, we want to work through the row, and color alternate cells black. So now would be a good time to pause the video and think, how might you do that? How might you do that? How might you color those alternate cells? What skills and what techniques would you need to do that? Remember, we're repeating an action. So there's a particular programming concept, really powerful, that's going to allow us to do that. So pause the video now if you want to think that through. But what we're definitely going to need is a loop. And a loop allows us to work through the same instruction a certain number of times. That's what a loop is going to allow us to do, excuse me. And I'm going to, the loop I'm going to use here is going to be a do until loop. I'm going to put something in here. I've got an idea for how to control this, because I'm thinking, we want to go along here a certain number of times, work along the row a certain number of times. But how would we control the loop? We don't want the loop to keep going all the way across the spreadsheet. That's clearly not what we want to do. But nor do we want the loop just to go through once. Yeah, we've got to think of a control, something we can tell Excel to stop going through the loop. So when we get to column J, we want Excel to stop. So how might we do that? I'm just going to comment out the loop for the time being. Obviously, there's many different ways to do that. I'm going to use a technique to tell us the column that we are currently in. So I'm going to say check column number. And I'm going to use a message box dot column. There we go. Now this dot column commands. So this is telling us the column number of the selection. So we're currently in column I. So I'd expect this to flash up a message box with the number 9 in, which is exactly what has happened. Okay. So this is interesting. So Excel can tell the column number of the cell that is currently selected. This is interesting for us because we're going through selecting cells, doing something to the cell. So if we can say to Excel, if the column number of the current cell is more than a certain value, then stop the loop. And that could be our loop control. That could be our way of controlling the loop, using the column number, saying to Excel, keep working through the columns until the column number is higher than a certain value. This is a good loop control for us to use. So how might we integrate that into the loop that we're working on here? So I've got do until, and then I'm going to say selection.column is more than, so what are we looking at here? J is the 10th column in the alphabet. So do until the column number is more than 10. That's what we're saying effectively there. So we'll test that loop control in a second. Let's put an annotation in there. Let's just say open loop. It's also very important at this stage to remember to close the loop. So good programming practice is when you open a loop, close it straight away. I can just put loop at the bottom. Do until and loop work together. It's one of the possible loop controls at Excel. For next is another common loop control, but we can see do until allows us to set a condition, gives us the flexibility to set a specific condition, which in this case works for us. That's why I've chosen to use do until rather than for next. So this is certainly going in the right direction. This range C10.select, I want to position that outside the loop because I want that to happen once. We want to select that column and then subsequently work through the loop. So I want to do that outside the loop. I don't want to do that every time it goes through the loop. So we want to do that first, position that outside the loop. So this is getting there, but what would happen if we ran this now? Well, it's simply selecting the cell and then it's going to keep coloring this black because we're not moving the selected cell across. Remember, we want to move across the chessboard, coloring alternate cells. So we've got to achieve that effect of moving across a couple of cells. So again, this might be a good time to pause the video and think, how might you do that in Excel? We want to move across a couple of cells. One of my favorite VBA commands, which is of course offset. So let's say, let's do the coloring first. Think clearly about the order of events here. We want to do the coloring first, and then we want to move across two cells here. So with offset, the first number is how many rows to move down. We don't want to move any rows down. We want to move 2 columns across. There we go. Okay. So this command, selection.offset 02.select, it's simply going to select, we're going to start on A1, then it's going to move across to column C, to column E, talking about the chessboard coordinates as well, until the column number is more than 10. When is the column number more than 10? Well, if it gets to column K, if it gets to column L, the column number is going to be more than 10, so it's going to stop the loop right there. Okay, just going to do some resizing here. Seems to be about right. Okay, so I'm now happy to run this code. In fact, a better idea would be to step through the code. Let's step through the code. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I can see that C10 is selected. Let's just clear this first. Alt-H-E-A to clear the cell there. So hitting the F8 key, so just stepping through the code. We can see we've selected C10. Now what's going to happen once Excel executes this line of code? Well, nothing's actually going to happen because this is a control for the loop and the condition to step out of the loop is not yet being met. In fact, if I hover over selection.column, let's see if we execute that. I'm just going to hover over selection.column. Okay, I can't see what selection.column is. So let's put a message box in here to make this absolutely clear. Selection.column. Okay, so now a message box will flash up to tell us what the column number of the selection is. This is going to make things clearer. There we go. So we've got a 3. That's because the C column is the 3rd column. That seems to make sense. Then we're going to keep working through. We're doing the coloring. Now we have got to this offset, the offset command. So what is this going to do? Again, maybe pause your video, try to understand what's happening here. So I'm going to execute the code now, and we can see we've skipped across 2 cells. So I'm going to hit F8 now. We've gone back to the top of the column. Selection.column is now 5 because we're in column E. Keep working through the code, colored black, and then we've moved across to the next. Now in column E. Message box, yep, we're now column number 7, seems to make sense. And there we go, we've got the color. So one more time, selection.column, so column 9 seems to make sense. So we're expecting, we haven't met the condition to exit the loop yet, so we're expecting this coloring to happen. Okay, there we go. And finally, we're now in column, let's just do a bit of resizing here. There we go, we're now in column K. So we're going back to the top of the loop. What are we expecting to happen now? What are we expecting to happen now? Well, column K, that's the 11th column in the spreadsheet. So selection.column is more than 10. That means that this loop condition has been met. And that means Excel is going to exit the loop. Let's see that happen now. We can see Excel has exited the loop, gone all the way down to the end of the routine. So that seems to make sense. We've got a very nice do until loop there, referencing the column number, using a loop to repeat a certain action, but only as long as we want it to happen, using the column number there to control the loop. Really nice loop example. So let's go back to the spreadsheet now, and yeah, we're progressing through this task, but we're going to need another loop here. And well, you might want to pause your video now and think about how you might do this yourself, but clearly we now want to go to the next row and then do some coloring there, and the next row until we get all the way up to row 8. So again, let's think conceptually first, try to take a step back, speak in English to yourself and think, how are we going to do this? Or rather, what techniques are available to us to help us do this? Well, once again, we're talking about repeating an action. So this action here, we're repeating it 4 times to go along the first row. We then want to do that whole thing 8 times. Okay. So what concept might help us here? Well, the concept of a loop within a loop. A loop within a loop is going to help us. Some repeated actions repeated again. That's what we're looking to do. So how might we do this? Now this is going to take a little bit of thought here. I'm gonna delete this color white code because this is complicating matters. You'll notice I've done an indentation here. That's because I know we're going to have to introduce another loop here, and I'm going to give this loop a name. Let's say column loop, okay, because this loop is working along the columns as we just saw. Then I'm going to say close column loop. So this gives us a good level of clarity using the annotations. You can see we've opened the loop here and then closed the loop. So just looking at that code, I can quickly understand how the code is working. I'm going to do the same with this with and end with. Begin color cell black and end color cell black. There we go. So just adding some annotations here just to make things clearer. It's going to help us because when we introduce a loop within a loop, you know, things are going to get complicated. So it's good to have things as clear as possible. There we go. Let's put an annotation here. Move along to columns. There we go. A little bit more size there. Okay, so we've got this loop here. We can see from the indentation. That you can see clearly where the loop starts and begins. So the loop is taking us across the board. We're going to need another loop, and the loop we've created is going to sit within this loop, a nested loop. We want a loop to work up the rows. This is what we're looking to do. So I'm going to use another loop here. And how am I going to control this loop? This is what I'm thinking about now. Well, can I use a similar mechanism to how we controlled the first loop? This could be a good option. Let's try to do that. But now I'm talking about not moving across horizontally, I'm talking about moving up and down vertically. So rather than selection.column, what control could we use here? So let's say do until selection.row. Then selection.row is less than 3. Seems to be appropriate because our board ends, row 8 on the chessboard is row 3 in the spreadsheet. So that seems to be appropriate, that. And then loop again. Okay, so we've got a loop within a loop here. I'm going to say open row loop, and then at the bottom of the row loop, close row loop. So putting the annotations in there, annotations, indentation, helping us understand what's going on. Okay, so now I've got to think about how we're going to do this. So, okay. Yeah, so we're moving along the spreadsheet here. Let's just remind ourselves how this is working. Let's move this across a bit. It's going to do some resizing here. There we go. So let's just step through this code. Okay, I'm going to comment out this message box for now. Just going to keep stepping through the code. Okay, so we're moving across until the selected cell. We're going all the way to column K. Then we're going to exit the loop. Okay, so how can we maneuver from column K back to where we want to go, which is the beginning of the next row? That's what we want to do. Okay, in fact, it would be good if we could go back to column B on the chessboard or column D in the spreadsheet, because that's where we want the black square to be. So how might we do that? Well, again, we can use offset here, selection.offset, and we want to go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cells. We want to go one row up. We can see that. We want to go one row up, and then we want to go, yeah, I think -1 is going to take us up, but we're going to check this in a second. And then -7, I think it was. Okay, so I'm not sure if that's absolutely precise, but let's just see how it goes. Now this time I want to run the code to here. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in the code. You can see I just clicked in this little column here, put the breakpoint in the code, and then I'm just going to hit play at the top. And now this is the line we're interested in. The line is highlighted, so it hasn't been executed yet. I can just hit F8 now, and we can see that the selection has just jumped across to there. That seems to work well. Let's do it again. I've got a breakpoint in here. You just left click in this little margin to get your breakpoint. That means the code is going to stop once it gets to that point. Okay, this is the selected cell. So I'm going to hit F8 now, and we can see this seems to work well. Okay, seems to be well positioned there. So the question is, will this work on subsequent rows? So I've got a breakpoint in here, so I'm going to just play the code again. Okay, that seems to work. Let's play it one more time. Okay, that's not quite right. Seems to work. Okay. Okay, there we go. So we're certainly close, but we need some tweaking to get this absolutely right. Just going to clear the code there. Let's try to understand what's going on here. Let's remove the breakpoints. Let's have the breakpoint in there. Let's just hit play. There we go. Okay. So this is working. This seems fine, but this is actually the part that's problematic. Okay, because if we hit F8 now, we can see where the selection is. Okay, so actually we want the selection to go back 2 more cells. We can see we want to end up in this cell here. So that's if we're in row 2, row 4, row 6, row 2, row 4, or row 6. We actually want to go back we actually want to go back 2 more there. Okay, so I'm thinking about how to do this. Well, one way to do this, as always, there's multiple ways, but the way that's just come to mind here would be to use, I'm going to go for a new module here to create some new code. There we go. And we want to distinguish between odd and even rows, because one set, if it's an odd row, we want to go back a certain number of cells. If it's an even row, we want to go back a different number of cells. So we want a mechanism to understand if the cell is odd or even, if the row that the cell is on, rather, is odd or even. So how might we do that? Well, let's go message box first. And we're going to use the mod operator. So selection.row mod 2. Okay. Not absolutely sure about this. Let's just play it, see what happens. Okay, 0. Play this. Okay, we've got 1. Play this again. Okay, 0. Yep, so this mod operator tells us after a division what is the remainder. It gives us the remainder after a division. For example, here we're on row 6. Row 6 divided by 2, that gives you 2 3s. So that means we have a 0. But if we go to 5, then 5 divided by 2, that gives you 2 2s. That gives us 1 remainder. So in this case, the mod operator is going to return 1. So if selection row dot 2 equals 1, then we're on an odd row. Okay. Odd row, there we go. Okay, I'll talk you through this in a second. Okay, smooth this up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're introducing an if statement here. Now we need an if statement because we want Excel to do one of 2 things. If Excel is on an even row, we want Excel to go back 7. If Excel is on an odd row, I think we want Excel to go back 8, something like that. So let's just try this. Else this is an even row. You can see I'm using lots of annotations to help me here. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this line of code. Okay, so I'm not sure if this is the right way round yet. This might need to be -9 actually. Okay, I'm going to get rid of some of the spaces here just so you can see things all at the same time. Okay, I'm going to step through the code now. Just going to put a breakpoint here, play the code. In fact, before I do that, I'm going to just clear these cells, Alt-HEA. There we go. So step through the code to here, then what happens? Okay, we've got an error there. Let's see. Okay, I'm not absolutely sure what happened there. Let's see what's going on. Okay, let's play the code again. Okay, not absolutely sure what happened there, but stopping and playing the code can help. Okay, so what's going to happen here? Well, we're on an even row. So we would expect Excel to come down to this part of the if statement. Let's see what happens. Yeah, Excel has come down here. So I know this should be -7 because that was the original command we had was -7 So I'm just tweaking these numbers here. Don't worry if you're not following this, it should become clear in the end, and I will of course make this file available online for you to download and work with. Anyway, I've just put a breakpoint in here and then step through the code, try to understand what's going on here. Okay, so play the code to there. So this is our mechanism to identify if it's an odd or an even row. This is an even row, so Excel goes down to this part of the if statements. So we've gone back to column D. This seems to work. Then we do the colouring in column D. So now we're on an odd row. We're on an odd row here, so you can see Excel's gone to a different part of the if statement there. Then we're going to go back to column C. So the offset is different. Here we're going back 9 cells. Here we're going back 7 cells. Let's play it again. Okay, that seems to work. 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 And then one more. And then we're out of the loop. Okay, so this seems to do the job. I'm going to just put a message box at the end. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to do one more thing as well, which is to create some code to clear the board. Okay, should be able to just type this code in. I don't need this routine anymore. So let's go sub clear board. Has to be a single word. And then just bring this into your screenshots. Just going to adjust this slightly so you can see it better. There we go. So now we can just say range. So it's C3 to J9 dot clear. Okay, and that dot clear command is going to clear everything, the contents and the formats of the cell. But now I can create another button here. So I'm just going to hold down the control key, select, drag the button, use the alt key to line them up, then edit the text here, and let's say clear board. So this is going to clear the colors. Got to assign a macro, right mouse button, assign macro, clear board. You can see because of the way I name the macros, clear, informative names for the macros, I can very easily identify the macro I want. So now this is going to clear the board for us, although the reference isn't quite right. So I've got to go around down to row 10 there. So C10 to J10. There we go. That seems to do the job. Then color the board, board complete, clear the board. Okay, not quite right. Yeah, this should be C3 to J10, of course. There we go. Control S just to save it. Clear the board, color the board. There we go. Clear the board, color the board. Okay, so that's a great example. If we just go back to the main code we looked at in this video, that's as far as we're going to go in this video, by the way, but a great example of combining together different mechanisms to achieve a super powerful routine there to get something done at the click of a button. What are the main techniques we've got there? Well, we've got a loop. Remember, first we looped across the row. So we've got that loop first. Then we've got another loop around that. And that loop that's containing the first loop, that's working up the board. So we've got a loop within a loop, really powerful VBA mechanism. Then we had the problem of how to manage the position control. Because we wanted to go to a different square according to if we were on an odd or an even row. We've used a conditional statement to do that. This line of code identifies if we're on an odd or an even row. Then we can see the positioning using offset is slightly different, 9 cells or 7 cells back, according to whether we're on an odd or an even row. So very nice example there. So this is a good start to our Excel chess challenge, the Skunkworks series. We can color the board, but I'd like these colors to be a little bit more sophisticated. I don't just want black and white. I'd like the user to be able to have a cell here, for example, where they'd be able to decide what the formats would be, and then the routine would copy the formats of that cell onto the board. I think that would be a really nice mechanism to have. So we're going to deal with that in the next video. After that, we're going to have to think about putting pieces on the board. So how are we going to represent the pieces? We're going to use shapes. To begin with, we're probably just going to use letters to represent the pieces, but it'll be nice to have some symbols representing the pieces. So we might look at that in future videos as well. So that's the first video in the Skunkworks series. So as I said at the beginning, not super clear, precise tuition. I was really working hard myself to get that programming done. You could see I've run into a few problems, managed to get around them, managed to get it working. But that's a really good example of how Excel VBA programming works. You know, it's not always super smooth, step by step. You're always going to run into problems, and just destroy the board there. Always going to run into problems. And often, or I say a key skill for a programmer is debugging and problem solving. So this isn't working. What mechanism can we introduce to make it work? You've seen a good example of that in this series. So that's it for this video, first video in the Excel Skunkworks series. I hope you'll join me in the next video.